Hello, I'm Chris Burns, and welcome to The Network. Hard talk with a matrix of newsmakers. The headlines. The Ukraine crisis is driving the EU to rethink its energy policy. An EU report calls for more domestic production and to fast-track an EU energy market. Energy Commissioner Guenther Oettinger says the EU must avoid falling victim to political and commercial blackmail. But at what cost energy independence? Business Europe wants cost-effective solutions to keep industry competitive. Energy prices in Europe are already sky-high compared to other economies. The Commission wants a mix of renewables, nuclear, and, quote, sustainable production of competitive fossil fuels, read shale gas, an issue that has Europe deeply divided. Now, wired into this edition of The Network here at the European Parliament in Brussels, Ska Keller, German Greens MEP, who is still a candidate for President of the European Commission, Markus Beyerer, who is Business Europe's Director General, representing federations in 35 countries, and Klaus-Dieter Borchardt, the European Commission's Director of the Internal Energy Market. Welcome to all of you. Let's start with a question to all of you, starting with Ska. How vulnerable is Europe now, considering the Ukraine crisis, the fighting in the Middle East, and Russia planning to sell gas to China?
The EU is indeed very vulnerable. We are paying every single day 1 billion euros just for energy imports, and I think this is really not sustainable. At the same time, we're also dependent on the one planet that we have, and we're currently destroying it with fossil fuels and with proposals like shale gas. So we also have to see how we create sustainable energy production.
Markus, yeah, I guess you might agree to some extent there, right?
Well, I mean, first, I think there's no reason for panic, but it's for sure that the crisis in Ukraine and what is falling from this is a wake-up call. So what we need is to diversify our internal and external resources and also to exploit ways we have not exploited so far, like inter alia, also shale gas.
Dieter, is it going to be a cold winter up ahead?
I hope not, but by all means, the European energy system is vulnerable. The EU as a whole, some member states more than others. Some figures will enlighten this easily. 53% of our of our energy consumed is imported, and 88% crude oil and 66% of gas. And gas, we have one main supplier. These are figures we have to change.
How do we attack this? Do we need binding targets to do this, Ska?
Absolutely. We need binding targets when it comes to renewable energy. We also need binding targets for CO2 emissions.
What sort of binding targets? Can you be more precise?
We have to make sure that by 2050 we have a CO2-free, a carbon-free society. And studies show, and not just by Greens, not just by Greenpeace, but also by McKinsey, show that by 2050 we can actually have 100% renewables.
Okay. Markus?
Well, I would disagree. I mean, of course, we need to...
You disagree with binding targets?
I would disagree with 3 binding targets because we have to learn from the mistakes of the past. And we've seen that 3 targets are mutually distortive and are producing, before everything else, high costs. So what we want is a single target based on greenhouse gas emission reduction. I mean, this is something I would agree with Ska. But this should drive the other factors, because we want the market to decide about technologies and not politicians.
Dieter, should we rely on the market for this? Do we need binding targets?
I think I take the middle ground. Yes, we need binding targets, but not only for security of supply, but also for our climate and energy policy as a whole. I think we need clearly a greenhouse gas reduction emission target.
Okay,
we also need a renewable target and an efficiency target.
Right.
But all this has to be integrated in the market, and here we might discuss that. I might have a different view to Ms. Keller.
For 2030, I see the Commission proposing a 40% cut in greenhouse gases, renewables at 27% of all energy. Markus, is that realistic?
Well, we always said what we want. First, I mean, we are backing a binding greenhouse gas reduction targets beyond 2020, which has been a heavy debate, but we think this is the right way. But we always said it has to be realistic and adaptable, meaning we have to adapt whatever our ambition is to what the rest of the world is able and willing to give, because it's a global problem. We can only solve it on global level.
It looks like the rest of the world is not completely on board there. There's a lot of dissent. Ska, what about shale gas? That's another issue there. Should that be seen as a bridge technology?
Not at all. And if you are saying the market should decide, well, we get a lot of studies, we get a lot of information from the market that it's actually not economically viable. Shale gas would be way too expensive, and we don't have a lot of that in Europe. And we shouldn't underestimate the threats that it poses to our water supplies, to the people that are living in those areas, because we're not the US. We have densely populated area where the shale gas is, so this is clearly not a solution. It's a big threat.
Okay, Malkus?
Well, I can tell you, first, I think we cannot afford to not exploit this possibility, specifically in the situation we are in. Second,
because it gives the U.S. a competitive advantage over European companies.
Absolutely. And to add on the targets, if we would need an extra target, it would be a target on cost competitiveness. Okay. Because we have too high energy prices in Europe, and this is a heavy threat. But on shale gas again, and on the groundwater, I had a close look on this, and in Western Canada, for instance, they have fracked 170,000 wells without a single incident on groundwater.
Dita, it seems as though the Commission is going in that direction, but is the Commission willing to put the environment at risk to do this?
No, certainly not. But we also take the view that we cannot afford to exclude right from the beginning a resource that might be available in Europe. But we should not be dreaming here. We are not talking a US revolution. What we want is that we want to exploit it and to see whether for Europe it can be a complementary source of energy.
Okay, Scott, I know you want to respond to that, but let me, with Oxfam, it wants 45% renewables by 2030 and to boost energy savings by 40%. Can you do that without fracking?
Absolutely, and we have to do it without fracking because we're not Canada. We're densely populated. Our shale gas reserves are way too little as well. They would only cover up to 10% of energy consumption for the next 10 years, and that's nothing. And they're structured in a way that it's very difficult to reach them without harming the groundwater. And yes, it is possible. And yes, we need to talk also more about energy efficiency. That's a key word here, which also creates jobs.
Okay, Malkus, you wanted to answer that, I guess?
Well, it will not solve all our problems, this is for sure. But we cannot afford not having it part of the mix. And again, there is safe solutions. This is about controlling risks, assessing risks.
Right.
But we should not exclude this opportunity.
Okay, Dita, the Greenpeace says that your plan will mean environmental and economic disaster. The EU will remain a fossil fuel junkie. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, they can take the view. We take a different one because I think we are the world leader when it comes to the greenhouse gas emission reduction. We are promoting heavily the renewables. But for the renewables, we cannot, as Scholar Dean said, go up to 100% like that. We have not the market for it now. And we have to also deal with the intermittency, and we have to have the instruments in order to integrate properly the renewables into our market. Otherwise, we create a new problem.
Could you see an economic boost here? There's some estimates that there could be a 4% boost to Europe's GDP, a 3% increase in jobs if we go more in that direction of renewables and conservation. What do you think, Malkus? Is that realistic?
Of course, renewables and energy efficiency will play a role in making Europe more independent, this is for sure. And we also need to invest in the new technologies, but we need to do it in a more cost-efficient way. And we must be realistic. I think this will have to play a role, but we will not be able to do without hydrocarbons in the upcoming years.
Scott, is that realistic, or do you think maybe it could even be greater, a boost?
Well, I think getting a carbon-free society by 2050 is absolutely possible if we now invest into that, if we now put our efforts into that and not divert our efforts towards shale gas. And when you're saying the market solves it all, we also have to see that the market, so to say, sold our infrastructure to Gazprom and other Russian giants. So I don't think that we can leave it up to the market. We have to say also in which direction we want to go, and there we have to make very clear we want to get away from fossil fuels.
And we have to be cost competitive.
Right.
Because you have to see...
to do that with fracking.
And you have to see that Europe, between 2000 and 2012, dropped in our share of foreign global foreign direct investment flows from 40 to 24%.
Last word, very quickly.
It's a whole discussion now to put everything on the shale gas. Everybody knows that Europe will not live the same experience as the US. So let's focus on the real thing. Shale gas needs to be exploited, and let's exploit it, and maybe we come to the conclusion that it will not work for us because the risks are too high or it's too costly.
Guys, I'm so sorry we're out of time. I'd like to thank our guests, Ska Keller, Malkus Bayer, and Klaus-Dieter Borchardt. I'm Chris Burns, and until next time, thanks for connecting with The Network.